In recent years, one drug has become almost synonymous with rapid weight loss: Ozempic. Millions of people started using this type of medication, hoping to lose dozens of pounds almost effortlessly. And for many of them, the promise really seems to work at first. The weight drops, appetite decreases. The scale is starting to show numbers that haven't appeared in years. But there is an important detail that almost never comes up in advertisements or conversations about these medications. And when you understand this detail, you begin to realize that the story is much more complex than it seems. Imagine a person who starts out weighing around 250 pounds. After more than a year of using this type of medication, she loses approximately 50 pounds. At first glance, this seems like an impressive transformation. But here's the question that almost no one asks. How much of that weight loss was actually fat? And what other things does the body desperately need to stay healthy? Clinical studies show something that surprises many people. A significant portion of the weight lost during this process doesn't come solely from fat. A significant portion may come from muscle mass. And this completely changes how we should look at this type of weight loss. Think of the body's metabolism as an engine. Fat functions as stored fuel, but the muscles function as the engine itself. When a person loses muscle mass, their metabolism can slow down. This means that the body starts to expend less energy throughout the day. Now imagine what happens when someone loses weight rapidly, but also loses part of that metabolic engine. At first, the scale shows lower numbers. But the system that controls energy consumption may be functioning differently. And this raises an important question. What happens when a person stops using the medication? Will the weight remain stable, or will something unexpected happen next? Clinical studies themselves are beginning to show a worrying trend. Many people regain much of the weight they lost. But the most curious thing is that the weight that returns doesn't always have the same composition as the weight that was lost. And this is where we begin to understand why so many people end up trapped in a cycle that is difficult to break. Because there is a system in the body that controls appetite, satiety, and metabolism. A system that already exists naturally within you. And that these medications are basically trying to control it artificially. But before explaining how this system works, there's something even more curious. The human body already has an internal mechanism that does something very similar to the effect of these medications. The big difference is that this natural system was designed to work in balance with diet and lifestyle. Then an interesting question arises. If the body already has this system naturally, why does it fail to function correctly in so many people? That's exactly what we're going to understand now. To understand what is really happening with medications like Ozempic, we need to look at a system that already exists naturally within the body. This system involves a hormone called GLP-1. This hormone is produced in the intestines whenever you eat. And it has three main functions that help the body control weight. The first function is to send a signal to the brain saying that you are satisfied. In other words, it helps to reduce hunger. The second function is to help regulate blood sugar by releasing insulin when needed. And the third function is to slow down digestion. When digestion happens more slowly, the energy from food is released gradually and the feeling of fullness lasts longer. This system is one of the natural ways the body uses to maintain a balanced weight. Now an interesting question arises. If this system already exists naturally, why do so many people have difficulty controlling their weight? The answer lies in the modern lifestyle. Over time, certain factors can cause this system to function increasingly poorly. Ultra-processed food, excess sugar and refined carbohydrates, sedentary lifestyle, constant stress. All of these factors can interfere with how the body responds to satiety signals. And when that happens, the brain can start receiving confusing signals. The person eats and shortly afterwards feels hungry again. Satiety lasts for a shorter time. Blood sugar spikes become more intense. This is where medications like Ozempic come into play. They basically mimic the effect of GLP-1. But they do it in a much stronger way than the body would normally produce. Instead of activating the system naturally after meals, The medication keeps this signal active for several days. This drastically reduces appetite and can lead to rapid weight loss. But here an important issue arises that few people discuss. When the effect is artificially created by a drug, the body can become dependent on that external stimulus. And when a person stops using it, the natural system that should control hunger may not be functioning in the same way. That's why many studies show that much of the weight lost can return after the medication is stopped. Now, an even more interesting question arises. Is there any way to stimulate this same system naturally? In other words, activating GLP-1 using diet and habits that help the body produce this signal on its own? The answer may surprise many people. There are specific foods, nutritional combinations, and small habits that can activate this system naturally. And some of them are extremely simple to apply in everyday life. Before explaining exactly how to do this, there's a small adjustment in how you start a meal that can have a huge impact on blood sugar control. Some studies show that a simple change in the order of meals can reduce glucose spikes by up to 40%. And most people have never heard of this strategy. But before continuing, it's worth mentioning something important. Many people who are trying to lose weight also look for natural ways to support their metabolism and glucose control. There are nutrients and natural compounds that are being studied for their role in supporting metabolism and metabolic health. If you'd like to learn more about one of these options that many people use as part of their healthcare routine, I've included a link in the description with more information. Now, going back to the point we mentioned, there is a very simple way to start activating this natural system of the body as early as your next meal. And it only involves two types of food that are probably already part of your diet. That's exactly what we're going to see now. Now let's talk about something extremely simple, but which can have a much greater impact than many people imagine: the way you start a meal. Most people sit down to eat and start by eating the easiest foods to consume: bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, or any other food rich in carbohydrates. The problem is that this can cause rapid spikes in blood sugar. When blood sugar rises rapidly, the body responds by releasing more insulin, and after that peak comes a fall. It is precisely at this moment that many people begin to feel hungry again shortly after eating. Now think of something interesting. What if the way you arrange food on your plate could completely change your body's response? Some studies show that a very simple strategy can significantly reduce glucose spikes. The strategy is to start the meal by alternating protein and fiber, instead of eating all the carbohydrates first. The idea is to consume small amounts of protein and fiber-rich foods throughout the meal. For example, a little protein, then a little fiber, then protein again, then fiber again. This pattern can help slow down the absorption of carbohydrates. And when absorption happens more slowly, blood sugar levels tend to rise in a much more stable way. This has two important effects. First, the brain receives satiety signals more clearly. Secondly, the body may naturally produce more hormones related to hunger control. Among them is the very GLP-1 we mentioned earlier. Now an interesting question arises. Why do protein and fiber have this effect? Protein is one of the nutrients that most stimulates the feeling of satiety. It requires more time to digest and also sends important signals to the brain. Fiber, however, works in a different way. It feeds the bacteria in the gut. These bacteria produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids. And these compounds can directly stimulate the intestinal cells responsible for GLP-1 production. In other words, by combining protein and fiber in the same meal, you can stimulate two different pathways that help control hunger. Now, an interesting detail emerges. Not all fibers produce this effect in the same way. Some types of fiber are much more efficient at feeding gut bacteria. And when these bacteria receive the right kind of food, they produce more of these compounds that help stimulate the satiety system. This means that certain foods can help the body activate this natural mechanism much more efficiently. But which foods actually help stimulate this system? And what are some fiber sources that don't have as much of an effect on this process? When you understand this difference, you begin to realize that small changes in your diet can have a huge impact on how your body regulates appetite. And some of these foods are much simpler than most people imagine. Let's now look at some specific examples that can help activate this natural system in the body. Now that you understand how protein and fiber can help stimulate the body's natural satiety system, an important question arises. Which foods actually help activate this process more efficiently? Not all fibers work the same way. Some pass through the digestive system with almost no interaction. Others are fermented by gut bacteria and produce substances that help stimulate hormones linked to satiety. These substances are called short-chain fatty acids. When these molecules are produced in the intestine, they can activate the cells responsible for releasing GLP-1, and this can help the body signal to the brain that there is already enough energy. Now think of something interesting. If gut bacteria are responsible for producing these compounds, then what really matters is the type of food that feeds these bacteria. Some foods are especially rich in this type of fermentable fiber. Among them are simple foods that many people already have in their kitchen: garlic, onion, leek, asparagus, artichoke. These foods contain a type of fiber called inulin, which is very efficient at feeding gut bacteria. When these bacteria ferment inulin, they produce precisely the compounds that help activate the satiety system. There are also other interesting sources of fiber that can help in this process: chia seeds, flax seeds, avocado. These foods not only provide fiber, but also help slow down digestion and maintain more stable energy levels. Another food group that can be very helpful is fermented foods. For example, sauerkraut, kefir, other fermented vegetables. These foods already contain beneficial bacteria that are part of the gut microbiome. When the gut receives these bacteria and the right food for them, the digestive environment can become much more efficient in producing these molecules that help regulate appetite. Now think of something curious. A small amount of fermented food can have a much greater effect than a large, regular salad, when the goal is to stimulate these bacteria. This happens because fermented food already contains both the bacteria and some of the compounds produced by them. But there's a detail that many people ignore when trying to apply these strategies. They change their diet, but continue to maintain habits that directly interfere with their satiety system. For example, eating constantly throughout the day, snacking between meals, consuming ultra-processed foods that constantly stimulate appetite. When this happens, the system that should help control hunger can remain unregulated. Then an important question arises. What simple lifestyle changes can help the body restore this system much more efficiently? That's exactly what we're going to understand now. Now that you understand how certain foods can stimulate the body's natural satiety system, we need to look at something even more important: the context in which you eat. Because the human body was not designed to receive food constantly throughout the day. But that's exactly what happens in modern life. Food available at all times. Snacks between meals, sugary drinks, ultra-processed foods that stimulate appetite even when the body already has enough energy. When this happens, the system that controls hunger can begin to lose sensitivity. The signs of satiety become weaker. A person feels the urge to eat even when they don't need the energy. And as the years go by, this pattern can contribute to weight gain and metabolic problems. That's why some experts recommend something extremely simple. Reduce the frequency of meals. Instead of eating all day long, many people benefit from concentrating their food intake into 1 or 2 main meals. When the body goes longer without food, various metabolic processes begin to reorganize. Insulin sensitivity improves. The body begins to use its energy reserves more efficiently. And the natural signs of satiety tend to become clearer again. Another habit that can make a big difference is something very simple: take a walk after meals. A light walk of a few minutes helps the body use some of the glucose present in the blood. This can reduce sugar spikes and help the metabolism function in a more balanced way. And there is a third point that many people completely ignore: preserving muscle mass. Muscle isn't just for strength or appearance. It functions as one of the body's main metabolic engines. The greater the amount of healthy muscle mass, the higher the daily energy expenditure tends to be. That's why strength training can be extremely important during weight loss processes. They help preserve metabolism while the body uses its fat reserves. Now think about something important. When weight loss occurs while preserving muscle and improving metabolism, the results tend to be much more sustainable. But when weight decreases while metabolism slows, the body may have much more difficulty maintaining this new balance. Perhaps that's why so many people get stuck in repeated cycles of weight loss and regain. They focus only on quickly reducing the weight, but not on restoring the metabolic system that should maintain that stable weight. And perhaps that's the most important part of this whole discussion. The human body already possesses extremely sophisticated natural mechanisms for regulating appetite and metabolism. When these systems function correctly, weight tends to balance out much more naturally. Now I want to ask you a question. Do you think most people are looking for quick fixes to lose weight, or are they actually trying to restore the natural functioning of their own metabolism? Write your opinion in the comments. And there's another very common mistake that can slow down your metabolism without most people realizing it. I explained exactly how this happens in another video on this channel. This video is definitely worth watching right now.